Photographer in Buffalo, New York, where Simpson played football for the better part of his career, heard about his testimony regarding the shoes and started rummaging through photographs that he had of O.J. Simpson. And sure enough, he has this picture of Simpson wearing what appear to be these Bruno Magli shoes. And what was remarkable about the photograph is that you could actually see the sole. Simpson was reported in the article as saying it was a complete fraud, it was laughable. Somebody doctored the picture with digital equipment, and that it's not the shoes that he wore that day. Right before the end of the trial, another photographer in Buffalo came forward with 30 more photographs of Simpson wearing the same shoes on the same day. And to top it off, a photo included in that group of 30 of him wearing the shoes was published in a newspaper put out by the Buffalo Bills organization 9 months before the murders. So now we had the photo in a newspaper, a matter of public record, meaning it was impossible for anybody to have doctored these photos.
Simpson lost the case and was ordered to pay the families of the victims millions of dollars. The family's lawyers had successfully argued to the civil trial jury that Simpson owned a pair of Bruno Magli shoes. So could Simpson have been at the crime scene with or after someone else? Dr. Henry Lee believes he has found evidence that supports the idea of two people at the murder scene.
At the scene, we notice another set of a shoe print, also on the Bundy walkway, with parallel line design. It's a smaller size, about 10.5. It's not one, it's quite a few, which indicative that's a trail. It's not a random deposit.
Dr. Lee was told that none of the shoe prints from the police officers or other officials at the scene matched this parallel line design.
It could be a second person, another suspect. That's a possibility. Could be a witness, another possibility.
Simpson's defense team also unearthed a third possible shoe print, this time leaving the scene heading on to Bundy Drive. So is there an explanation that makes sense of all this evidence that points away from Simpson as the killer, and yet explains the footprints and the blood at the scene? Private Eye Bill Deere thinks he has some answers, and tonight reveals his findings.
From watching the trial, there's no doubt in my mind he came to the crime scene. But to me, he came after the murders.
Deere wondered whether anyone else could have caused Simpson to go to the scene. After investigating other possible suspects, he homed in on just one, Simpson's son from his first marriage, Jason.
Then I picked up the phone and called my source. I said, find out if there's any record at the police department of Jason Lamar Simpson ever being interviewed by the police department. He said, no, they never interviewed him. I said, what? Are you really telling me they never interviewed him? Never interviewed him. So I said, okay, I've got to look further. I go down to the city and I look up criminal records. I found that at the day of the murders, that Jason Lamar Simpson was on probation.
Deere discovered that Jason, a chef, had been put on probation for a violent attack on an employer, Paul Goldberg. He also found that Jason had other convictions, including drunken driving and hit and run.
Talk to Ms. Goldberg.
Great. What you found out?
Deere and colleague Herman King tracked down Mrs. Goldberg, who witnessed the attack.
But she said he worked for us about 3 or 4 months, and one day he called in and said, I can't come in, I'm sick. And then 2 of the other cooks came in and said, hey, I saw Jason at a basketball game. Next day, Jason shows up and said, I'm back to work now. I think I'm going to quit, and I want to be paid for being off, for being sick. And Paul said, no, I'm not going to pay you for being off. You were at a basketball game. He said, you're going to pay me. And said his face started lighting up. Said, you're going to pay me. You owe me. And Paul said, no, I'm not going to pay you, and turned to walk away. And said, all of a sudden, Jason came run up behind him and hit him from the back and was hitting him from the back, and when he fell down, Jason was stomping him with his foot. Next thing you know, he reached for a knife, one of the kitchen knives or chef knives.
Right.
And she said the police were called and said Jason was arrested and the charges were filed. When they went to court, she said that the charges were lowered to a misdemeanor, but he was fined and placed on probation.
After many interviews with people who knew Jason, Deere discovered that he had a troubled past and a history of violence. Aged 15, Jason had even attacked a statue of his father with a baseball bat. For Deere, the key question now was whether Jason had a confirmed and convincing alibi. On the night of the murders, 24-year-old Jason was working as a chef at Jackson's restaurant in Beverly Hills.
He was known by the people that worked there, and pretty well liked too, if I remember right. And as like most chefs, he had his own utensils, his knives, and as I remember, they were all accounted for.
According to the police, Jason had a watertight alibi. He was cooking until late that evening.
We've established that he was with people that spoke for him, that they were with him, and his times were accounted for. So he was eliminated as a suspect very quickly.
Well, I've always taken a position, you never assume, you always verify. So I went to the restaurant. I then am talking to the waitresses, and I said, I was in on the 5th, I think it was the Sunday before, and I named the date because it was June 12th when Nicole and them were murdered. And I said, you had hardly anybody here. And she said, yeah, we were lucky we had 20, 25 people. We started closing right after July on Sunday, lack of business. Well, all of a sudden my mind's clicking, and I knew then that, hey, something wrong.
So how early did the restaurant shut that night? Deere tracked down a former waiter at Jackson's to find out.
What time do you think they would have shut down if there was no business on June 12th?
We're no business like on Sunday. Even now we're a little busy, like 9:30 kitchen starts breaking down.
If on Sunday night, June 12th, and there was only 20 to 25 people, then you'd shut down, what, 8:30, 9?
9.
You'd leave early.
So if the restaurant shut as early as 9, who could give Jason his alibi? Jason himself has given an account of his movements on the night of the murders. He stated that his girlfriend, Jennifer Green, picked him up in his car around 10 to 10:30, and they drove to her apartment. He then dropped her off and went home, where he watched television until 3 in the morning. To verify Jason's story, his girlfriend's testimony would be crucial. Deere tracked her down to a fashion store in West Los Angeles.
I located, finally, the girlfriend, Jennifer Green. I said, were you with him on the night of June 12th? Absolutely. She said, well, I was supposed to pick him up at 9:30, so I got there right at 9:30. And he came out and he said, I'll be a few minutes. He came out a little before 9:45. I said, what happened then? She said, well, he came out. I said, was he carrying anything? Oh, yeah, he carries his knives that he takes with him. I said, oh, you're talking about his chef's knives? She said, yes, his chef's knives. And he got into the Jeep, and we drove to my house. We got out and went upstairs to my apartment. I said, till what time? Oh, Mr. Deere, he was with me till after 11 o'clock.
The two stories were in direct contradiction to each other. The times were different, and Jason stated that he never went up to her apartment, but Jennifer was adamant.
She said, you can verify it from the time clock. You know, his time records will show what time we left. We left about 9:45.
It was about a 5-minute drive from Jackson's restaurant to Jennifer's apartment, and a further 15 to 17 minutes to drive to Nicole's house on Bundy Drive. So Jason could have been at the crime scene at around 10:15 that night, which was the earliest the police believed the murders could have occurred. With doubts over Jason's alibi, Bill Deere continued to look into Jason's past, and in particular for a previous girlfriend, Dee Dee. What she said astonished him.
Took me a couple years, but I found Dee Dee, and this is what Dee Dee told me. I dated him for quite a period of time. I liked him, but he had a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality. In fact, he tried to kill me. I went home one night, and Jason was mad. I had picked up Chinese food. He threw it at me. And I ran for my life, and he jumped on me, and he had in his hand one of his chef's knives. He took and pinned me there and reached down, and I thought he was going to kill me, but instead he took the knife, and he cut off all my hair. I turn left here.
Dear and colleague Herman King found that Jason had a history of disturbed behavior, which began as early as 14, when he overdosed on cocaine.
This is where it gets a little hairy.
They discovered that Jason had been a heavy drinker, as well as using other drugs.
Also found that he'd been placed in a mental institution for evaluation, and that he'd attempted suicide 3 times. There's his Jeep. There's his Jeep right there.
One of Deer's methods is to go through people's rubbish. After examining Jason's rubbish for some time,